I would like to begin the discussion by saying something which I am fond of telling my students. Sylvia Plath is one of the finest women poets in world literature. She is the most famous woman poet, American woman poet. She is the most famous American woman poet. She is the most famous woman poet in American literature of the 20th century. Just as Emily Dickinson is the most famous American woman poet of the 19th century. It is always a pleasure, it's always a joy to teach a Plath poem. In some ways, the Colossus is a quintessential Plath poem. We meet within the Colossus. We meet within the thematic narrative of the Colossus. We meet within the stylistic methodology of the Colossus. Many of the features which are characteristic of Plath at her best. And these include the speaker's obsessional relationship with her own father, the speaker's love-hate relationship with her father, the speaker's attempts to outgrow the toxic shadows cast on her life by the memories of her father, the use of daring imagery, the use of striking figures of speech, the refusal, the stubborn refusal to be enslaved by semantic concerns, the determination to take the path indicated by the poet's own inspiration, however wild and however difficult and however painful that path be. The Colossus is one of the finest poems written by Sylvia Plath. It is the only poem which lends its name to the title of a book published in the lifetime of the poet. In fact, in 1960, Sylvia Plath's collection, The Colossus and Other Poems, was published. That was the only collection to be published in her lifetime. And thus the Colossus becomes the sole poem, the only poem in the entire corpus of Sylvia Plath to lend its name to the title of a collection of the poet. As in the case of almost every Plath poem, this particular poem has a very effective and very appropriate title, The Colossus. Obviously, the Colossus is a reference to the Colossus of Rhodes, one of the wonders of the ancient world, the huge statue which stood in the harbor of Rhodes, the Greek city, and which was looked upon as one of the wonders of the ancient world. Today we use the term Colossus to refer to anyone who has a very huge and a very impressive stature. The title could also be an allusion to the Colossus, a character in the Ouija board games that Sylvia Plath and Ted Hughes used to play. The poem is organized in 6 stanzas of 5 lines each. This means that the poem comprises 30 lines. There are minor variations in linear length. Minor variations in linear length. Every line in the poem begins with a capital letter. The first letter, the first word of every line is capitalized. As in the case of many a Plath poem, A line by line analysis, a word by word analysis is virtually impossible. But the general import of the poem is clear. The poem invites comparison with the much more famous piece, Daddy, and also with the bee poems. As in the case of Daddy and as in the case of the bee poems, the Colossus deals with the speaker's father, or more precisely, the speaker's relationship with her father. In real life, Sylvia Plath had a very complex, ambivalent relationship with her father, Professor Otto Plath, who was a teacher of biology, entomology especially, and German at the University of Boston. In the notes that Sylvia Plath appended to Daddy, she wrote that the poem is spoken by a girl with an Electra complex. But that is not the whole story. In a textbook Electra complex, the daughter feels an attraction towards the father, is very much attached to the father, loves her father blindly, but also hates her mother, dislikes her mother, and sees her mother as a rival for her position in her father's heart. She wants her mother out of the way. It is very doubtful whether in real life Sylvia Plath's relationship with her father could be brought within the matrix of a classic Electra complex. Be that as it may, Professor Otto Plath breathes his last when Sylvia was a little girl, and that added to the difficulties, the complexities of the relationship. In her poems, including Daddy, including the Colossus, Sylvia Plath makes it clear that the memories of her father continue to haunt her throughout her life. She never completely succeeded in releasing herself, freeing herself from the stranglehold of her father's memories. In fact, in Daddy, one gets the impression that the speaker's father, Daddy, was a sort of Dracula who drank her blood. And the impression that we get in this poem is not very different. In the first stanza, the poet makes it clear that the subject matter of the poem, the Colossus, the speaker's father, was a complex personality. He was not lacking in contradictions. He was not someone who could be comprehended easily. And the little girl that she is, the little girl that she was unable to piece her father together, to understand the real nature of her father, to put together the various pieces in her father's complex, contradiction-ridden personality. To the little girl, it appeared that her father was always speaking, was indecent in a humorous way, was bawdy, was making confusing noises, inviting comparison with the noises that emanate from a barnyard. On the whole, the daughter was unable to comprehend, to understand her father. In the second stanza, the speaker seems to refer to the memories of the father. The father died when the speaker was a child, but his memories did not die. The ghost of the father continued to haunt the daughter. In fact, in Daddy, the poet speaks of the memories of the father drinking her blood, creating a stranglehold over her, ruining her life. Something similar is said in the present poem, in the second stanza of the present poem. 30 years have passed, but the speaker is unable to get rid of the ghost of her father. And the spirit of her father has been haunting her year after year, all these 30 years. The father, when he was alive, saw himself as an oracle, as a medium of the supernatural, as a voice of the gods. The father saw himself as more than human, as superhuman. And it would appear that this self-evaluation had its impact on the daughter. But now 30 years have passed, and the girl is certainly wiser, and she has tried her best to get rid of the stranglehold of the memories of her father, but she has not been successful. The third stanza amplifies what has already been said. It emphasizes the humongous difference in the scale that separates the father from the daughter. The father is the Colossus, the daughter is the ant. She requires ladders to climb up the statue. At the same time, the speaker makes it clear that there were negative aspects in the personality, in the character, in the life of the father. Lysol is a disinfectant, a very commonly used disinfectant. The mention of Lysol makes it clear that all was not well with the father, and the use of disinfectants was necessary to clean the dirt, to remove the dirt, to clean the mess in the character, personality, life of the father. As the poem progresses, it becomes progressively defiant of analysis, evaluation, comprehension, and explanation. But as I said, the general import of the poem is clear. A blue sky out of the Orestia arches above us. Orestia is the trilogy, the famous trilogy of Aeschylus, the group of three plays at the heart of which we find incest and murder. What is the poet trying to suggest? There was an element of incest in the speaker's relationship with her father. It was a love-hate relationship, and she would have murdered her father if she had obtained an opportunity. So, the relationship between the speaker and her father in this poem invites comparison with the relationship between the speaker and her father in Daddy. A love-hate relationship, almost an incestuous relationship, also a relationship having in it strong elements of violence. O Father, all by yourself, your pity and historical as the Roman Forum. The Roman Forum was the plaza or the city center or the square, the town square in the middle of Rome. It is today surrounded by the ruins of numerous architectural marvels built in the days of ancient Rome. You are pithy and historical. Pithy means saying much very cleverly, using very few words. Historical, belonging to history. The Roman Forum is an open space in the heart of Rome, is a town square, is a plaza, surrounded today by ruins. It is historical, it belongs to the past rather than to the present. It is a tourist paradise, but it is pity. The ruins speak eloquently of the past. It is pithy and historical. The ruins speak volumes and volumes of the glories of the Roman Empire. The same is true of the speaker's father. The speaker feels that he does not belong to the present. He belongs to the past. He is historical. The speaker is overawed by his achievements, and so pity, the term pity is used. Without saying much, the speaker's father says much. Without saying much, the speaker's father says much. He is a set of ruins like the Roman Forum today, but the ruins are eloquent voices from the past. The comparison between Roman architecture and the speaker's father is continued in the lines that follow. Black cypress. Cypress is an evergreen coniferous tree. It is usually associated with mourning in the ancient world. The cypress tree was planted, for example, on graves. Fluted bones. Fluted means having flutes or having grooves or having lines. We have fluted pillars, fluted columns in Roman architecture. And acanthine hair like the leaves of the acanthus plant. Again, this is not, I don't think it's a reference to a real plant. There is a very common Mediterranean plant called the acanthus, but the reference is more probably to the design of the acanthus leaf, which was used in the Roman columns. The speaker wants to emphasize the comparison between her father and Roman architecture. Like Roman architecture, the speaker's father belongs to the past. Like Roman architecture, the speaker's father is now in ruins. Like Roman architecture, the speaker's father, though in ruins, speaks eloquently, speaks volumes and volumes. The opening lines of the next stanza strengthen the metaphor, linking the speaker's father with ancient Roman architecture. The poet has already said that he has fluted bounds, bounds with flutes, bounds with grooves, or bounds with lines, similar to the fluted columns and the fluted pillars that we find in classical architecture. The poet has already said that he has acanthine hair like the leaves of the acanthus plant, a design very much favored by Roman architects. He is not compared with Roman monuments, merely with Roman monuments, but with Roman monuments in ruins. And there is nothing but anarchy, complete confusion, complete lawlessness in their old anarchy to the horizon line. The speaker's father is metaphorized in the terms of an ancient Roman ruin, a set of ruins extending to the horizon line, creating a powerful impact on the mind of the viewer. It would take more than a lightning stroke to create such a ruin. What happened to the speaker's father? How are ruins created? The usual story is that a lightning struck the monument and the monument crumbled and became a ruin. The poet says that is not the whole story. In the case of the speaker's father, one lightning strike would not have been sufficient. There would have been a series of disasters in order to create the vast, massive ruin, Roman ruin, the vast, massive, ancient Roman ruin. That is the speaker's father. What is the poet trying to say? One, the speaker's father does not belong to the present, he belongs to the past. He is historical rather than contemporary. Two, he is a monument. That's fine. Not just a monument, but a monument in ruins. The ruins are vast, massive, impressive. Three, the ruins speak eloquently. The ruins convey emphatically. The ruins utter volumes and volumes. Four, why the speaker's father became the set of vast, massive, impressive ruins is because of not just one lightning strike, but because of a series of disasters. The reference here is probably, the allusion here is probably to the problems faced by Professor Otto Plath in his life, right from the time he was a child in Grabau, the town, Grabow, Grabau, the town in Germany. Right from that time, the series of personal tragedies that affected his life, including the problems he had as an academic at the University of Boston, and finally the sudden death, the unexpected death at a rather early age. Nights I squat in the cornucopia of your left ear out of the wind. They look rather difficult, but we shall try to explain them. The speaker says that she squats at night. Night after night she squats. To squat is to sit with the knees bent. Where does she squat? Where does she sit? Inside the left ear of her father. And the left ear of her father is metaphorized as cornucopia, or the horn of plenty. Out of the wind. I would say that this poem, or rather almost all the poems of Sylvia Plath, which draw their inspiration from her father, are an attempt to balance the negative aspects and the positive aspects. Here, the speaker admits that her father, who in real life had been dead for quite some time, dead for several decades, is a source of protection and inspiration and plenty to her. I think the relationship is somewhat like the relationship between a statue, an ancient historical statue, and its keeper. The speaker is the keeper of the statue. She looks after the statue. In fact, she lives inside the statue. And the statue is a source of much strength, much prosperity, much inspiration, much guidance to her. Out to the wind. It even protects her from the wind that batters this world. The problem with Sylvia Plath is that she has a very complex relationship with her father, and she is compelled to create a complex poetry in order to capture this ambivalent relationship, this complex relationship, this intense love-hate relationship. In the sixth stanza, in the last stanza, the speaker explains what she does as the keeper of the statue, which represents her father. The ancient historical statue, which is a metaphor for her father. What she does and what she does sitting inside the ear of her father. She counts the stars. The stars are red, the stars are also plum colored. Plum color is more purple than red. And not just purple, purple with a tinge of brown, the color of the typical plum fruit. And there is a reference to the sun rising from under the tongue of the father. What is the poet trying to convey? The father is a source of inspiration to the daughter. He died long back. But if she is achieving anything now, if she is an achiever now, it is because of the inspiration provided by the memories of the father. In real life, Sylvia Plath was an overachiever. And much of the problems, much of the psychological problems she faced was because of her inability to live up to her own extremely high standards. In fact, at the time when she breathed her last, she set for herself the target of writing one excellent poem every day, come what may. And she would be terribly upset if she failed to meet that self fixed target. The point here is that sitting inside the ear of the father, completely protected by the memories of the father, she finds tremendous inspiration from those memories and tries to become an overachiever. But that unfortunately is not the whole story. The father is a source of light, of sparkle. He is the sun, he is the stars, or at least the sun and the stars represent the inspiration provided by the father, the strength provided by the father, the guidance provided by the father. But that is not the whole story. The father is also a source of gloom, of despair, of melancholia, of shadow. The life of the daughter as the keeper of a statue, of the statue, of the ancient historical statue which metaphorizes the dead father, is not always pleasant. It involves hours and hours of gloom. She is married to shadow. In real, or it could be a reference to her own marriage to Ted Hughes. The story goes that one of the reasons why Sylvia Plath married Ted Hughes was that he closely resembled her dead father, or at least resembled her dead father as she imagined her dead father to be. While the father is the reality, the husband is only the shadow. There's a world of difference between the real and its shadow. The father is the real. The husband is the shadow. Professor Otto Plath is the real. Ted Hughes is the shadow. I would like to draw your attention to a few lines from Daddy, Sylvia Plath's Daddy, where she alludes to her marriage to Ted Hughes. And she gives the impression that the main reason why she married the man she married was that he closely resembled her dead father. And then I knew what to do. I made a model of you, a man in black with a main calf look, and a love of the rack and the screw. And I said, I do, I do, I do, I do, are the words uttered by the bride in a Christian marriage ceremony, where she expresses her willingness to marry the bridegroom standing near her. One thing which is very striking about this poem is its highly original images, highly original imagery. And now at the very end of the poem, at the close of the poem, there is a sudden twist. There is a sudden surprising twist in the imagery. We meet with a marine image, the very last image, the image at the bottom, the image at the very closure of the poem is that of a vessel landing, vessel or trying to land. The very last image in the poem is that of a ship or a boat trying to land. No longer do I listen for the scrape of a keel against the blank stones of the landing. What is the poet trying to say? When the ship or the boat lands, its keel, the structure at the bottom of the vessel, scrapes or rubs roughly against the stones, creating a very unpleasant noise. But the unpleasant noise indicates that the ship has come home, the boat has come home. The poet here says that she no longer waits for that noise. She has given up all expectation. She no longer attempts to hear that noise or wait for that noise or expect that noise because she knows that there will be no homecoming. There will be no landing. The marine imagery is a contrast to the imagery of the forum, imagery of the plaza at the center of the city of Rome. What is the poet trying to convey through this image? One, things will always be like this. There will be no dramatic turn, no spectacular upswing in her life. Her life will continue as it is now. Two, to be more specific, she will always be the keeper of the statue representing her father. She will always live in the shadow of her father. She will always be the daughter of her father. She will never ever be able to erase that identity. Three, the memories of her dead father will always exercise a stranglehold over her life and be a source of inspiration and despair simultaneously to her. There will be positive inputs, there will be negative inputs, both from the memories of her father. Thus, the poem concludes on a rather helpless note. The poet makes it clear that she has lost all hope, lost all expectation. There will be no landing. There will be no homecoming. She will never ever be able to hear the scrape of the bottom, scrape of the keel of the boat against the stones. It is time to take a look at the technical aspects of the poem. We have already considered the title of the poem and tried to demonstrate that the poem has a very appropriate title, a very carefully chosen title. We have already considered the structure of the poem, how it is divided into 6 stanzas of 5 lines each, how the poem consists of 30 lines. We have already evaluated the stanzaic pattern, as I said, 30 lines organized in 6 stanzas of 5 lines each. We have already said that the linear length of the poem experiences only minor variation. Coming to the diction of the poem, as in the case of a typical Plath poem. The diction is everyday. The poet makes use of ordinary conversational words. The diction is not poetic, and I use the word poetic within quotes. The diction is simple. The diction is highly appropriate to the content of the poem. Let us take a look at the images in the poem. A poem can be meaning driven or image driven. In this particular case, I am unable to say whether the poem is meaning driven or image driven because there seems to be a perfect balance between meaning and imagery, between the semantic content and the imagery. They perfectly balance each other. The images are stunningly original. The images are mostly drawn from animal life, from the human body. There are images from classical mythology, images from classical literature, and above all, there are images from nature. An allusion is a reference, especially an indirect reference. The present poem is a poem thick with allusions. There are allusions to ancient Greek life. Oracle, for example, is spoken of. Allusions to classical mythology. Allusions to Greek literature. Allusions to Roman architecture. Allusions to Roman architectural ruins, all of which contribute to the richness of the poem. The poem under consideration does not have a formal rhyme scheme. It does not use any formal meter. It is a free verse poem rather than a poem in traditional verse, notwithstanding the fact that it is organized in a very neat manner in 6 stanzas of 5 lines each. On the face of it, it looks like a poem in traditional verse, but it's a poem in free verse. But I would say that if you take some effort, you can find the ghost of a rhyme scheme, the ghost of a meter lingering in the poem. The symbolism of the Colossus needs to be addressed. The Colossus was the tallest statue of the ancient world. It was one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. It was a statue of the Greek sun god Helios, which stood at the entrance of the harbor of the island of Rhodes, of the city of Rhodes. What does this symbolism suggest? To the daughter, the father was a Colossus. The father was a larger-than-life figure in the eyes of the daughter. And this is something which we find in several other poems of Sylvia Plath, notably in Daddy. As far as the daughter was concerned, the father was a Colossus. But we must understand the history of the Colossus of Rhodes in order to unravel the symbolism in this poem. The Colossus was built in 280 BC. It was proclaimed the tallest statue of the world And it was indeed the tallest statue of the ancient world. It was one of the seven wonders of the world. But in 226 BC, the statue collapsed as a result of an earthquake, and later the statue was completely destroyed. I think this is very significant to the student of the Plath poem, because to begin with, the father is a colossus, but the colossus collapses. The colossus is in ruins. The colossus is destroyed. This is precisely the relationship between the father and the daughter. The father, who is a larger than life figure to begin with, but then who is discovered to have feet of clay. I think a better title for the poem would have been The Fall of a Colossus. What does the scrape of the keel on the plank stones of the landing symbolize? I think that there is very profound symbolism hidden in the closure of the poem. The keel is the bottom of the ship or the bottom of the boat. And when the vessel reaches the landing, the keel scrapes against the stones. The keel makes a rough sound. The keel makes a very unpleasant sound by scraping against the stones of the landing. What does the arrival of the boat at the landing, the scraping of the keel against the stones of the landing, symbolize? It could symbolize the speaker has come home. It could symbolize the speakers reaching the right answers. It could symbolize the speaker overcoming her own turbulence, the speaker putting an end to the turmoil within herself. It could symbolize the speaker reaching a stage of peace. The point here is that the speaker makes it clear that all these things do not happen. The speaker does not come home. She has given up all hopes of coming home. The speaker does not get the answers for the questions which have been haunting her. The speaker is unable to put an end to the turbulence within her, to the restlessness within her, to the turmoil within her. The speaker fails to arrive at the answers to the questions which are troubling her. The speaker fails to come to terms with herself and with the world. There is no doubt that Sylvia Plath is one of the most inspired poets in the English language. Most of her poems were written because she could not help it. She had to write those poems. She just could not avoid writing those poems. I am reminded of a quotation of Sylvia Plath. It is one of my favorite quotations, which is very much applicable to the poems of Plath in general and to the poem under consideration, the Colossus in particular. I quote, "The blood jet is poetry, and there is no stopping it." I repeat, the blood jet is poetry, and there is no stopping it.